I too am an African, and as we celebrate and reflect on Africa Day, we take a look at a thorny issue in South Africa, xenophobia. To help me examine this issue and more, I'm joined by former EFF Secretary General Godrich Gardee, Action SA leader Herman Mashaba, and Program Manager at the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation, Annah Moyo Kupeta. To be a part of this conversation, WhatsApp your questions and comments to 072 110 5584 or tweet us at Newzroom 405 using the hashtag Roundtable405. Ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening. Thank you kindly for being a part of this discussion. My first question really goes to Mr. Mashaba. There have been many comments that have been attributed to you around immigrants and xenophobia. What is your position on immigrants and xenophobia?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Hugo and Newzroom Africa, for giving us this platform. Much appreciated. I think it's unfortunate that South Africa is the only country on earth where we are an expression of illegality is not allowed, which is really very unfortunate. I think because of the dysfunctional state of home affairs and the corruption within that department has created a nightmare for South Africa, where today we're sitting with over 12 million of our own South Africans unemployed, with the murder capital of the world, with the rape capital of the world. I mean, I can really go on and on. And this is an issue that I think as South Africans we need to really confront. And South Africa, as you're aware, was built at the back of migrants, and we need to really continue on that trajectory to encourage and invite people of the world to come to our country so that they can help us build our economy. But people must come here legally, and when they are here, they must respect the laws of our country.
Thank you for that. I'm delighted that you are not seemingly pointing a finger at immigrants, but you do suggest, Mr. Mashaba, in your opening statement when you talk about the numbers of unemployed people in South Africa, are you suggesting that this is a result of the number of immigrants that are in South Africa?
Absolutely. I mean, there's just no doubt about that. You don't have to be a statistician or a political scientist to figure this one out. I think when you have a country with 12 million, 43% of your own population unemployed, and you have open border policy, what would you really attribute this to? I mean, not that the foreign nationals are 100% responsible for this, but they significantly contribute to this high levels of unemployment in our country. We cannot have people come into to open spaza shops and hairdressing salons and operate in restaurants and be truck drivers when our own people are unemployed. It cannot really be. No country in the world except South Africa is expected to allow such situation to really develop. And I think for us as Action SA, and me in particular, as a patriot, as a patriot South African, absolutely not acceptable.
Mr. Mashaba, there are approximately 4 million immigrants living in South Africa, and many of those obviously are here legally. What do you account for the other 8 million unemployed South Africans?
Yeah, well, if you look at the Hugo, the billions of counterfeit goods that are brought into this country illegally, counterfeit goods, expired goods brought into this country with no taxes being paid on them. People open up spaza shops throughout our country. This has impacted negatively on businesses, particularly in the townships and the rural areas.
Mr. Gardee, good evening. Thank you for joining us. I see you rubbing your chin. Your thoughts this evening, sir?
Well, good evening, Hugo, and to your viewers, to our guest. A happy Africa Day, a happy Africa Unity Day. Every 25th of May every year. So we celebrate Africa Unity Day and Africa Day. It is unfortunate that at this day and era we will have people like Mr. Mashaba, I mean, talking like they say, they talk now. I mean, there is nothing immigrant laborers and foreigners in South Africa. All what we have in South Africa is what we can call Afrophobia. Nothing is said about whites who come from other European countries into Africa and declared as illegal immigrants. It is only when it has got to do with Africans and our people in Africa and our leaders in Africa actually forget what is called the 1884 Berlin Conference. Africa never had borders. There was a scramble for Africa by European powers, and they divided Africa. And today, and to date, Africa remains divided because of that 1884 conference. You will go to Swaziland and Mozambique and South Africa where the three borders meet. You'll have families that are torn apart by these borders. Does it mean that they must not move around? I mean, today, the whole of Europe, there is free movement of people, services and goods without even passports. In fact, there is a universal passport of European citizens. But here in Africa, we still find ourselves on a balkanized Africa, which is based on tribalism and regionalism and characterized by actually the European conquerors, the Francophone, the Anglophone, and North Arab Africa. We should actually desist from such an African attitude to other Africans in South Africa.
Before we invite Ms. Moyo Kupeta to say a thing or two, I'd just like to go back to Mr. Mashaba. Mr. Mashaba, there are 250,000 individuals from the UK, from Germany, from Portugal, and from the Netherlands resident in South Africa. You've only talked about the jobs, the spaza shops, and the informal traders. What about the Europeans and other individuals from the West that are in South Africa?
Hugo, when we talk about illegal immigrants, one does not really speak about illegal immigrants from Africa. We speak about immigrants from all over the world. We're sitting with big numbers of Pakistanis, Indians, Kazakhstans, and Bangladeshis, people from Mexico. I can tell you, the last time I went to Parliament to go and raise this issue of the dysfunctional state of Home Affairs, I had a presentation showing at the time when I was executive mayor of the city of Johannesburg, just in 3 years, how many foreign nationals the JMPD had arrested. People from literally all over the world, including some coming from the United States of America, some coming from Australia, because South Africa has been recognized, has been identified by criminal syndicates that it's a free-for-all. And that is something that South Africa should not really allow. I find it really very disturbing that every time we talk about illegal immigrants, even when we show you evidence that we are not only sitting with African illegal immigrants, we're sitting with an international immigrants. Look at what the Guptas have done to our country. We are right now as a country in economic big trouble. We are literally broke as a country. The Guptas came here. Our Minister of Home Affairs, our own ANC government, gave them, fraudulently, gave them South African citizenship. Look at what they did to our country. Are they Africans? So I don't understand why every time when one raises this issue of illegal immigrants, immediately we want to divert attention. We only want to talk about Africans. We're not only sitting with illegal immigrants from Africa. We're sitting as South Africa. We're sitting with the problem of immigrants from all over the world. There's this Roman creature who's sitting in jail. He's wanted in his own country, in the Czech Republic. Why don't we send him back there? He came here because South Africa is actually the World Cup of crime. We are allowing criminal elements which are needed in their own country for crimes. They come here in South Africa because they know they will be protected.
Mr. Mashaba, that is the clarity that we are looking for. Do stay with us. We'll be right back after this as we continue our conversation around xenophobia. Thank you for joining us in this Africa Day conversation, where I'm joined by former EFF Secretary General Godrich Gardee, Action SA leader Herman Mashaba, and Program Manager at the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation, Annah Moyo Kupeta. Ms. Moyo Kupeta, thank you for joining us. Now, as a Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation, I can imagine there's a huge amount of work that you've had to do in light of xenophobia. Take us through some of the challenges.
Thank you, Hugo. And really, or maybe I should start here to say Happy Africa Day to all our viewers and to everyone in Africa who is an African and also who celebrates this day with us. We've done a lot of work around xenophobia, xenophobic violence in South Africa. And some of our research and some of our advocacy work and community work in the communities that are affected by xenophobic violence in South Africa has revealed, amongst other things, Hugo, that xenophobic violence is really a product of a number of structural issues that our communities are being subjected to. So issues of poverty, for instance, the structural issues that really fuel or that are at the root cause of xenophobic violence. For instance, if you go to our communities, maybe just to start with the point that Mr. Mashaba raised, that xenophobic violence, that criminality in South Africa is because of, and unemployment is because of foreign nationals. So those issues that he has spoken about, issues of criminality in South Africa, issues of high levels of unemployment, issues of poverty, poor service delivery in South Africa, and scarce resources, especially in your informal communities, in your townships, for instance, where we see xenophobic violence springing up most of the time. These issues are very much active, and they are very much at the core or at the root of xenophobic violence. So you have issues of high levels of unemployment, and you have employers, for instance, who would prefer to hire non-nationals in your hospitality industry, in your construction industry, menial jobs, for instance. And the reason for this is because then it's easy to exploit non-nationals because, again, most of them would not really pursue good labor practices. When they are not paid, they don't complain. When they're given a lower pay or lower wages, they don't complain. They are grateful for the job that they are offered. So that fuels xenophobic violence. But at the root of it all is really your structural issues. Poor service delivery in our communities. For instance, we have seen, Hugo, over the past few years, that it starts off as a service delivery protest, and who then becomes the target of violence is your small business owners who are non-nationals in communities, where now communities begin to channel their anger and frustration at non-service delivery or poor service delivery in their communities, targeting non-foreign nationals. They become an easy target because they are vulnerable. They don't have the protection from the government or from other sources, for instance. So then they're being beaten up. Their shops are being looted. Their houses are being looted because now they're being blamed for being the reason why the services are scarce, the services are not available in communities. They must go back to their homes. But when we look again at the demographic of non-nationals in South Africa, some of the non-nationals that Herman Mashaba is speaking about are refugees and asylum seekers who have fled from their own countries of origin because of conflict, out of fear of persecution or of even being killed if they had to continue living in those countries. So these have sought asylum in South Africa. South Africa has ratified a number of international human rights instruments at a United Nations level and at an African Union level, including the refugee conventions at both AU and UN levels that mandates South Africa to protect refugees and asylum seekers who come into this country seeking asylum, fleeing from persecution in their countries of origin. South Africa has a duty to protect them, but these are the very same non-nationals who live in informal settlements where resources are very scarce. They are living alongside South Africans. They are competing for jobs. They're competing for resources with South Africans who are also unemployed. And of course, those tensions play out in xenophobic violence, for instance. When you put into the mix the exploitation, Hugo, that I spoke about by employers where they choose to employ non-nationals because they are more vulnerable, they don't complain, they will not go into the streets to protest when they're not being paid or when they are being subjected to unfair labor practices. Again, this fuels the fire, and again, xenophobic violence begins to take place in these communities, because then, in the eyes of nationals, then non-nationals are taking the jobs that are meant for South Africans. But again, it's really not the doing of non-nationals. And again, the rhetoric by leaders, our community leaders, also comes into play when they start to blame non-nationals for criminality in South Africa, for drugs in South Africa. And some of it really is part of the politicking during electioneering processes, where you begin to say, these are taking your jobs and I'm going to get rid of them. We have seen some of these statements. Mr. Mashaba has made them previously in 2017, and we saw the fallout with the violence that took place in your Rosettenville, GP's town, and it began to flow into Pretoria and other areas. So what our leaders say also comes into play. We need also to take that into consideration, because these become triggers of already volatile situations in our communities where there's scarce resources, there are no resources, there's poor service delivery. So for non-nationals become sort of what I'll call a scapegoat for the ills in society, the economic ills and the social ills in our society. And they become an easy target, a vulnerable target where all of the frustration can be channeled to. And lastly, Hugo, I'd like to also point out that our researchers pointed out that even how the media sometimes reports on criminality that has been committed in communities also fuels or triggers xenophobic attacks or xenophobic violence. For instance, when a crime has been committed in a community, let's say by someone who's not a national in South Africa, you see the headlines such as Nigerian man kills a woman, or Nigerian man nabbed for drug abuse, Zimbabwean man nabbed for this and that. Again, that othering comes into play, and already within the volatile situation that we have in our communities, that triggers violence, because in the eyes of the public who are hearing some of these statements, it means that then criminality is being committed by Zimbabweans, by Nigerians, by Congolese, or any other non-national citizen in South Africa. So we begin to see the mobilization of community members against that particular non-national category that would have been, for instance, labeled as having committed a crime. We have seen marches, for instance, labeling Nigerians as bringing in crime, bringing in criminality in our communities, bringing in drugs. But really, when we begin to unpack crime and criminality in South Africa, crime happens, and a lot of crime is committed across the board by nationals and non-nationals. So there is a need for us to deal with issues of criminality, address crime.
Kupeta, I'm going to come in there. Sorry to interject.
To address these issues.
I'd obviously like Mr. Mashaba. I'd like Mr. Mashaba to respond, certainly to being fingered in those suggestions that some of what he said in the past has triggered violence in communities around xenophobia. Mr. Mashaba, my second question my second question before you respond, sir, is do you not feel that as a leader you have a responsibility to protect those foreign nationals that are here legally? I'm of the opinion that if you walk into a certain part of South Africa and you or any other leader has just said illegal foreigners are in South Africa and are taking jobs, that those perpetrators of xenophobia do not ask for identities and confirmation that the individuals are legally in South Africa. It is across the board that there will be violence, and individuals that are innocent will be caught up in all that violence. Are you not painting every single foreigner who's in South Africa with the same brush?
I think, Hugo, it would really be unfortunate for any South African to accept us as South Africans to really be labeled as xenophobic. I think it's unfortunate listening to Annah and her research team. It looks like their research is actually focused on actually making South Africa ungovernable, making South Africa to operate without having a legal framework. South Africa has got a constitution hailed by the world as one of the most modern, which encourages us to respect human rights. So for them to carry out the research, focus on making South Africa ungovernable, where they don't expect us as South Africa to respect our laws and our constitution and destroy the rule of law, is unfortunate. And that is not going to happen, because some of us, we are going to openly challenge this, because what we've always said, and I maintain and I repeat, we want people of the world to come to South Africa. We want them to come here legally. And when they're here, they've got to respect our laws. There's every country in the world. Give me any one country in the world that will accept the kind of legality that Annah and her research team is doing. Why don't they go and do it somewhere else? Then they choose South Africa and expect South Africa to be a country where our laws don't really mean anything.
What about Annah's? Sorry, Mr. Mashaba. Can you tell us what about Ms. Moyo Kupeta's research seems to suggest bias or is unfair on South Africa?
No, it's not. I mean, their research, it's meant to make South Africa ungovernable. It's for South Africa not to respect our.
How so?
How did you? Did she ever mention the question why actually we have such high levels of crime where police are unable to really identify the culprits? Why is he not mentioning the fact of the dysfunctional state of Home Affairs and the corruption that's happening within Home Affairs? So it looks like obviously their organization is also there to protect our government and the corruption that's happening in our government.
How does that then become a problem of legal migrants in South Africa if a South African system, if the Home Affairs has loopholes or there is corruption? How does it become the problem of the individual who's legally in South Africa?
No, but the thing is, Hugo, I've always maintained, I remember, actually, I raised this matter on the 1st of December 2016. That's the first time when I raised this issue of undocumented foreign nationals. And raising it as per our constitution, that we need Home Affairs to really deal with this matter. And what happened when I raised this particular matter? At the time, Malusi Gigaba was the Minister of Home Affairs. He's one of the first people to start really calling me names, probably working with an organization that Annah represents, to start calling me names and abusing me, you know. In the meantime, he was the one responsible collecting money from the Guptas and creating havoc in our country, destroying the rule of law in our country. And that's probably, they somehow, the people who really protect this kind of criminality in our country are the people who are actual direct beneficiaries of this breakdown of the rule of law. South Africa, it's a sovereign nation, it's a sovereign country. They've got a constitution that spells out quite clearly who must get asylum status in South Africa. And there are some people who are in this country who will never qualify to really get South African citizenship, who are here. I gave an example of the Guptas. And what did their research ever discover or say about the Guptas? Well, I gave an example of Rowan Kresha, who's in prison today. When we're a country where 55% of our people today, we cannot really feed them, but we can feed a Czech fugitive who's in our jail when he's needed in his own country. Did their research look into matters like this? That these are some of the issues that are contributing to the state of affairs in our country, and we are going to challenge it and challenge it within the constraints of our laws.
Thank you, Hugo. Can I respond to some of what Mr. Mashaba has raised?
Certainly, please go ahead.
Maybe before she responds, we need to actually put Mr. Mashaba into his right position. Does he say out of the 200,000 inmates in South African jails who have been found guilty, the majority are people not from South Africa? Definitely not. Less than 5% of them are actually non-South Africans. Furthermore, we must actually disabuse ourselves from the use of the word xenophobia, because there is no xenophobia in South Africa. What we see in South Africa is a violence by South Africans against fellow Africans. There has never been violence of the South Africans against the whites who came here to settle in South Africa forcefully, who took our land, who took our jobs, who took our minerals. Those are the people actually who took our jobs, minerals, and land, not any other person who walked over to South Africa. Actually, what Mr. Mashaba is campaigning for is the re-electrification of the borders of South Africa so that people cannot pass through. We do not have the money to electrify the borders of South Africa as the apartheid regime did, and it will never happen. As a matter of fact, in South Africa, all what we see is irresponsible and stupid leaders who actually calls for the manslaughter of Africans who are in diaspora. And we should not allow that. We should call it for what it is and stop it there. It should not be allowed actually this thing of saying, put South Africa first. The next thing that is going to happen,
Mr. Gardee,
people will not be allowed to work in KwaZulu-Natal. People will not be allowed to work in Cape Town. People will not be allowed to work in Joburg because they will be told they are not of the tribe of that place. If you speak of crime and drugs coming here with immigrants, are you saying that in the Cape Flats and every other place where there are gangsters, those gangsters and the drugs in the Cape Flats actually are those people who get arrested there are foreigners? It's not true. It is our own people in South Africa who actually commit crime.
We will stop you there. Mr. Gardee, we will stop you there and certainly come back after this with an opportunity for Ms. Moyo Kupeta to respond to Mr. Mashaba. Don't go away. We'll be right back. We're speaking to former EFF Secretary General Godrich, Gardee, Action SA leader Herman Mashaba and Ms. Moyo Kupeta around the discussion xenophobia. Ms. Moyo Kupeta, you had some thoughts you wanted to respond to Mr. Mashaba?
Thank you, Hugo. I wanted to respond especially on the issue of our research. Mr. Mashaba, I presented some of our findings around the causes of violence. And as you know, we are the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation, and we study why we are so violent in South Africa and what causes some of that violence. And I present some of the root causes of violence. And indeed, from our research, which is evidence-based, these are the things that have come on the ground on why we tend to see xenophobic violence in South Africa. And indeed, going to the Constitution that you have highlighted, Mr. Mashaba, the Constitution, from Section 9 of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, going all the way to Section 35 of the Bill of Rights, which really contains the Bill of Rights, the right, all those rights accrue to everyone in South Africa, save for two rights, the right to vote and the right to citizenship. Those are the only two rights in our Constitution that are citizenship rights. All other rights accrue to everyone in South Africa, within the borders of South Africa, irrespective of nationality, irrespective of where you come from, or language, outside the languages that are spoken officially in South Africa. So our Constitution is the most comprehensive Constitution that really protects everyone in South Africa, including criminals. The very Section 35 I speak about speaks about the rights of criminals or rights of those who have been found guilty or who are being prosecuted in South Africa. So our Constitution really is protective of everyone and is comprehensive and all-encompassing in protecting the rights of everyone in South Africa. But at the same time, Mr. Mashaba, for us to deal with these issues of xenophobic violence, it's important for us to look at the root causes, because when we only speak about the need to take non-nationals out of South Africa, they bring criminality, In most instances, we are really dealing with the symptoms of the problem, not the root causes. But when we deal with the root causes, then we can begin to deal with the whole issue from the root in order to really begin to see or to facilitate a change and improve practice and begin
Moyo,
to
Kupeta,
start
I'm going to come in there. I'm going to
Africa.
come in there because I'd like to look at a couple of social media posts. This one is targeted at Mr. Gardee and says, what I would like to know from Mr. Gardee, what has EFF done to ensure that the majority of African people in this country are educated about African history? And this is from Sitembiso in eThekwini. A question I'd like to ask Mr. Mashaba is the source of his research about the numbers that he has spoken about. Mr. Gardee, very, very quickly, I will give you just half a minute to respond to that before Mr. Mashaba gives us the source of his statistics.
What statistics are you referring to? I've never referred to any statistics.
Mashaba, they say I should respond very briefly before you come in. I think you must just hold it there. Hugo, the economic freedom fighters has done so much to educate South Africans and Africans of their identity. Mr. Mashaba used to have something in business called Black Like Me, and I think he must just go back to that ideology of Pan-Africanism and Black consciousness. We need to educate South Africans and Africans to love themselves, and we do so in all our rallies throughout South Africa. In every rally, we actually educate the attendees to our rallies that, look, we must do away with regionalism, we must do away with the ethnicism, we must do away with tribalism. This is what the founding fathers of Africa said in 1963, that the biggest threat to African unity and African prosperity will be tribalism. And it is nothing but tribalism, what we call what we see as the fiefdom, or whatever they call it as countries, those villages they call sovereign states. I mean, what would you call a sovereign state just next to our borders?
I'm going to have to call time on your contribution. Mr. Mashaba, one of our watchers says, what is your plan with foreign internationals when you win the elections? And I suppose that response, if you can do it in half a minute, would be appreciated.
Well, I can tell you, if Action SA gets an opportunity to get the mandate from South Africans, what we'll do is we'll do a review of all citizenships issued since 1994, because I think that's when our democracy was attained, to make sure that everyone who's in this country is in this country legally, and those who are in this country legally, they must be protected, enjoy the full rights as citizens of this country. But those who do not really qualify to be in this country, they came into this country for wrong reasons, for criminal reasons. It doesn't matter where you come from, whether you come from Czech Republic or you come from Zimbabwe or anywhere else, we will send you back to your country.
And my last thoughts are, it's unfair that we're labeled as xenophobic when we speak of our status quo of our country. We cannot afford to have people coming into our country illegally, and when they're here, they do not respect our law. And that's from Shange Milnerton. Well, that was a former EFF Secretary General Godrich, Gardee, Action SA leader Herman Mashaba, and Program Manager at the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation, Annah Moyo Kupeta. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm truly grateful for your time this evening. We certainly would have liked to have carried on, but our time is up.